All right, good day, everyone. This is CJ with Rogue Money, and very excited today to be delivering another edition of Hanging with Harley. Harley Schenger of LaRouche Pack, and Harley does tremendous work with LaRouche Pack. We share all their articles, we cross post. Such a pleasure and an honor to have Harley with us today. So, Harley, how are you, sir?
I'm doing great. How are you, CJ?
I'm doing great, Harley. Just trying to. It's been a very interesting week with the amount of disinformation, a lot of things that are occurring, here geopolitically, concerning, and just wanted to get your takes on the events of happening, and I'll let you start the discussion.
I think we should start with something that caught everyone off guard again. And it's always good when the neocons and their media outlets get caught off guard. And that was the announcement of the Trump-Putin discussion by phone yesterday. Uh, this occurred after Putin's election victory, and Trump called to congratulate him. Now, that in itself caused an absolute freakout from the media. How can you congratulate Putin? Why didn't you challenge him on how unfair and unfree the elections are? How come you didn't challenge him on the poisoning of the Russian agent in London? But what really freaked them out is that Trump and Putin announced they're going to have a summit coming up. And the summit will take up how to prevent a new arms race. Now, the arms race is coming from the decision made by the transatlantic elites to carry out an encirclement of Russia with anti-missile defense systems in Eastern Europe, extending NATO to the very borders of Russia, and to make this a confrontation with Putin. People like John McCain have long wanted this. The neocons feel threatened by the emergence of Russia as an ally of China in the New Silk Road. But more importantly, on March 1st, Putin announced that the Russians had developed a new generation of weapons systems based on new scientific principles, which render all the anti-missile defense systems and NATO deployments and everything else impotent, that the Russians can't be stopped with that. And what Putin then said is that he's doing this not to threaten the West, but we kept telling you, let's talk, and you wouldn't listen. Well, now you have to listen. Now, the Western media went into an assault saying that this is Putin's efforts to be aggressive and threaten Western supremacy. But then they took up a second flank, which was the so-called poisoning of the former Russian agent Skripal in London, with no evidence, with no proof that there was any Russian involvement. Theresa May and Bobo Johnson, her foreign minister, went out and demanded that the West take action against Russia. And you did get a fairly weak letter from Macron, Merkel, and Trump saying that, well, we haven't seen the evidence yet, but we'll go along with May. But then even the European Union, in their meeting yesterday, rejected the charges against Russia until there's proof. The Organization for Prevention of Chemical or Prohibition of Chemical Weapons have also demanded proof. And in fact, the leading experts in Britain on chemical warfare have said they doubt that this is a Russian operation. So May and Boris Johnson are sitting there with their knickers around their ankles. And in the case of both of them, that's not a very pleasant sight. And then Trump and Putin talk, and what do they say? We want to prevent a new arms race. So we're going to sit down and talk, and we'll also talk about Ukraine, Syria, North Korea, Iran. So instead of seeing this as good news, what does our ever-loving, lying media do? They come out with a story that Trump was under explicit orders from his advisors, do not congratulate Putin. Now, we don't know for sure whether that's true, but if it is, here's an interesting question. How did a private briefing memo to the president get into the pages of the Washington Post? And why are they focused on that instead of the possibility that the two leading nuclear superpowers are prepared to talk to repair the damage that was done under the Bush regime and the Obama regime. So we see once again the logic of Russiagate, the logic of the challenge to China and to Russia coming from the West, even as the Western financial system and political system is in a shambles. So I think that's the lead story today, CJ.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting to listen to the mainstream media because they're right there with the neocons. They're right there with this propaganda against Vladimir Putin, against Russia, that he's assassinating people in Britain, all these atrocities that he's, creating and doing to humanity. So it's just doing such a disservice to the population, to America, listening to that, and they're chiming right in with that huge propaganda against Russia right now, Harley.
Well, the media is owned by the same people who fund the neocons. It all comes from the same London, Wall Street, Brussels connected banking elite who have wrecked the world economy with their free trade and with their attacks on national sovereignty, national economic sovereignty. And they're the ones who would prefer to have war than to lose their system. Now, there are two reports I just like to call to the attention of your listeners that go to the heart of some of the things that I've been talking with you about over the last months. One is a report from Morgan Stanley, which is usually not a reliable source, but it's a very interesting report on how the Belt and Road Initiative is going to change the world economy. And what they're saying is that China is investing wisely, it's developing physical economy. It's not, given that Morgan Stanley was one of the leaders of the run up to the 2008 bubble and has continued to function in that capacity, what we're seeing is some of their economic thinkers are starting to say, well, maybe the Chinese are doing things right. This has also come, the same kind of report has come from the Bank for International Settlements and some other organizations that usually are on the side of the global bankers. Now, at the same time, Morgan Stanley is putting that out. Uh, a, an official from Goldman Sachs, from their trading department, writes that the Western financial system is increasingly fragile, and even more so given the threat of the choking off of liquidity coming from higher interest rates. The Federal Reserve met in the last couple of days and they said we're going to have 3 to 5 increases in the interest rate in the next 18 months. Now, the International Monetary Fund, again, another unreliable, questionable source, but they reported that if interest rates get above 2%, and with 5 more rate hikes, they'll be well above 2%, that 20% of the corporations in Europe and the United States will go bankrupt because of their debt problems. If it goes up to 4%, as many as 40% of corporations, and these are the zombie corporations that have more debt than they have income. They need liquidity, they need free money from the banks. When you start charging interest for that money and they start raising their prices, and when wages have not increased in comparison to the real inflation, you're going to see a string of bankruptcies which will threaten the whole financial system. Add to that other levels of corporate debt. And we can see why they're so desperate to get to war, so they can use that as a club over the head of people who otherwise are saying, aren't you going to do anything about our suffering? So I think we're heading into an extremely interesting period where what the Chinese are doing offers some insights into what could be done, as opposed to more of the same, which has produced the terrible result we've seen going back to the second Bush administration in 2001.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're learning recent news that, Caterpillar, one of the global leaders in terms of industrial equipment, is closing, is scouring plants. They're closing a plant in Texas, one potentially in Illinois, shattering a significant amount of jobs, Harley. So that economic, that fake economic recovery that Trump keeps talking about is not happening, and you can't dispute the real numbers that are coming across from these companies.
Well, it's not going to happen with policies like Gary Cohn's tax cut, which good riddance to him. But his tax cut was accurately described. And again, I hate to quote the CEO of JP Morgan Chase on this, but Jamie Dimon was right. The tax cut was quantitative easing 4. There was no provision in the tax cut that the companies that could now bring their overseas money back to the United States, that they had to invest it in new plant and equipment, job training, recruitment of new workers. No, they could do whatever they want. And what do they do with it? They're pouring it into the stock market. So you're not going to get a recovery from that. You're not going to get a recovery from an infrastructure plan, again, courtesy of Gary Cohn and Mnuchin, the Goldman boys, that requires private partnerships for any investment and has almost no funds coming from the government for infrastructure. In fact, 80% of the funds that are supposed to go to the infrastructure plan drafted by Cohn are supposed to come from state and local governments, most of which don't have enough money to fix the potholes they have now in city streets. So you have two policies that won't work. Now you have the Wall Street boys pushing Trump under the argument that we're going to get rid of Dodd-Frank. What they're doing is getting rid of the only part of Dodd-Frank that was any good, which was restrictions on derivative trading, which in themselves, the Volcker rule, were never really enforced. But by getting rid of them, they're not going to be helping small and regional banks. They're going to be giving a new payday again to the large money center banks, the banks regulated by the New York Federal Reserve. In other words, the banks that get our money and give us increasing debt. So there's no recovery coming. You see it in terms of Europe now, where all the talk of reform from the EU is boiled down to nothing but more bailouts. And we're seeing political parties crash all over Europe. The same thing's going to happen in the United States. It did happen in the last election. That's why Trump was elected, because he's not a Democrat or a Republican. What he is, we don't quite know yet. But if he were to stick with his anti-establishment campaign rhetoric, we could see a transformation of the United States. So, the real question here is, what is the priority for Trump? And as I was saying to you earlier, I think his priority, which we see in the discussion with Putin, his collaboration with Xi Jinping, and I would discount some of this talk about trade war with China, because there's an extensive conversation going on between Trump and Xi and Chinese economists and people in the United States, where Xi is saying, look, we've got to do more to protect intellectual property rights. But regardless of that, his priority is to put an end to the regime change wars that were the policy of Bush and Obama. And that's why he's talking to Putin. Now, one other note on that, which I find very fascinating, was the arrest of Nicolas Sarkozy in France yesterday on corruption charges, which have now been confirmed by the son of Gaddafi and Gaddafi's chief advisor. The charges that Sarkozy asked Gaddafi for 50 million euros for his 2007 election campaign, and Gaddafi gave him 20 million, and Sarkozy complained about it. But then when it became clear that this was a potential vulnerability for Sarkozy, if the word got out that he was getting money from Gaddafi, what did he do? He went to Cameron, the British Prime Minister, and the Hillary Clinton, and convinced them that Gaddafi had to be overthrown and murdered. And so this is, in a sense, payback for Sarkozy. We don't know what will happen. I haven't heard from my French colleagues yet on what they think about this. But it's interesting, if a former president can be jailed for corruption charges of taking foreign money for an election campaign, what does that mean for Hillary if the investigation into the Clinton Foundation actually falls into the lap of a second special prosecutor? Very interesting, huh?
That is very interesting, and I'm glad to see the French, doing that. I wish that Jeff Sessions could be convinced here in the United States that we do need to have more of a prosecution type approach to investigating this, as opposed to the General, who's very limited on his ability in terms of what he specifically can do.
But I think the deep state people are quite freaked out right now. John Brennan issued a series of hysterical tweets, and Ray McGovern accurately characterized them as a man who's seeing the hangman's noose in front of his face. Brennan is up to his ears in this corruption. And there are a couple of other stories that broke in the last days. There's this Cambridge Analytica story where immediately the media turned it against Facebook and against Trump. Now, the Facebook thing is legitimate to turn it against them because Facebook is literally a surveillance operation. People who think it's so cool you can put your private thoughts to your friends on Facebook don't realize that all this is going into a metadata collection, which can be used by anyone. But more importantly, the parent company of Cambridge Analytica is run by top officials of British intelligence who use it for precisely that purpose, for psychological profiling. And so again, we see that something that they were trying to turn against Trump. I mean, Obama did the same thing of using metadata for the election campaign. But the scandal here is that British intelligence working through Cambridge Analytica and Facebook is compiling psychological profiles of every single American who uses Facebook. So if you're on Facebook, I'd urge you to reconsider being there. Then there's a second scandal that just was reported yesterday by the French website Voltaire. I can't remember the full name of it, but Thierry Maison writes about a British intelligence operation run by top people in MI6 who are promoting and working for the so-called White Helmet Group, which is the group that's doing all the reporting of supposed Syrian government use of chemical weapons. And not only that, but they provide recruiting videos for ISIS and Al-Qaeda. So this is something that's extremely interesting, that the British, because of the hysteria of Theresa May and Boris Johnson, have opened the door for a much deeper investigation of the role of the British in subversion of governments. And this then also connects directly to the role of Christopher Steele, the MI6 operative who was deployed to bring down Donald Trump. So it's all out there. It's all coming out. And the question is, will it be used? And I wouldn't wait for Jeff Sessions to do something. There's got to be a response from the American people. I say this every week on this program, but don't look for all the connectos. Look for the policy issues behind them. The policy issues are that you're being lured into a possible nuclear war for the defense of worthless financial paper being held by the world's largest banks. And our only defense against that is to act through the Congress. As corrupt and immoral as they are, they have to become more frightened by the American people than they are that Wall Street might withdraw their funding. And if we could do that, if we could get a few more of these congressmen to grow the cojones to take on Wall Street, then you would create a circumstance where Trump would be able to dump the whole crew of compromisers and neocons that have been brought into his administration and follow through with the real insurgency that he promised during his campaign.
Yeah, absolutely, Harley. And that's something that here at Rogue we're really trying to encourage Americans to do. Unfortunately, we have a good portion of society who is in belief that that a QAnon, that this 8chan board is directing policy, and that all these things are happening in the background. Yet we're seeing something completely different on the surface. So yeah, we have to start taking action ourselves and evaluating these things in terms of reality and not some type of mythical coding or messaging. Because I think, in my opinion, is that this has been a major distraction, a potential psyop to allow these things to continue unchecked while Americans just sitting there waiting for something to happen, Harley.
Well, they're trying to convince you that Mueller is working with Trump and that the whole Russiagate thing is a cover for going after the deep state, which I think is a dangerous fraud. On the other hand, look, we've put out an enormous amount of material, the LaRouche PAC has, including on the real history of Robert Mueller, his role as a British hitman for a long time. We were the first ones to really emphasize the Christopher Steele dirty dossier. And we had fights with congressional staffers who said, well, it's not the British, it's the Russians. And you still get that. There's a line going out to a lot of conservatives that the real issue isn't that Trump colluded with Russia, but Hillary did. Hillary didn't collude with Russia. She was trying to overthrow Putin. Her networks ran the coup in Kiev, which brought anti-Russian neo-Nazis into office through her sidekick, Victoria Nuland. So the idea that Hillary was colluding with the Russians is ridiculous. Yeah, they got money from the Russians. The Clintons got money from anywhere they could get it. But the real issue for Hillary is that she was in collusion with British intelligence. And British intelligence and its lower level operations, such as Saudi Arabia and Israel, are much more important than a few tens of millions of dollars siphoned from Russia into the Clinton camp. They got money from everywhere. But the question is, what was their policy? And the policy of Hillary was to go to war in Syria as a way to force the issue with Russia. And Trump said he's not going to do that. And up to this point, in spite of some dangerous operations being run by rogue CIA operators in Syria, Trump has kept to the idea that there would be US-Russian military cooperation. We see Dunford, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, in regular consultation with the Russian Chief of Staff, Gerasimov. We see interesting things like the Russian UN ambassador just met with Rand Paul. Why was that? Because Rand Paul is saying we shouldn't be running rogue operations all over the world. So there are people who are courageous, who are bringing up these issues, who are fighting, but they need the support of the American people. And that's why I would urge people to go to our LaRouchePAC.com website or go to my page on the LaRouchePAC.com site, which is lpac.co/Harley, where my weekly articles are posted. I'm just finishing an article right now on the importance of the Trump-Putin discussion. So if people want to be armed with the truth, listen to Rogue Money, subscribe with Rogue Money, and go to LaRouche PAC. And we do need your financial support as well, because we're running our operations on a shoestring. But we're going to keep running them whether you support us or not. The question is, we're willing to make the sacrifice. Are you willing to make a sacrifice for your freedom? And I'm doing it with my whole life. I mean, we're not asking you to give up your firstborn. We're asking you to contribute 50 or $100. For $100 a month, you can get our daily intelligence briefing sent to you via email. So again, I'd encourage people to go to LaRouchePAC.com and check out what we're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I know I check into it daily for updated reports and truly enjoy all the work, the articles, the amount of intelligence that comes out of your organization, and just so thankful for that, Harley.
Well, and we're going to keep doing it, and hopefully we're in a situation where the shrieks coming from the media and from Wall Street and from the British, like Theresa May and Bobo Johnson, these are the last gasps of a dying empire.
Absolutely. Any other closing thoughts, Harley?
Well, I think people should take heart in this. I mean, with everything that's been thrown at Trump, including this story that his inside advisors are telling him, do not congratulate Putin. Trump goes with his gut. And sometimes he's wrong, but when he's right, it's really important. And whether he is clear on who the neocons are and the neoliberals are, I'm not sure. But I'm going to fight like hell to support him when he delivers a blow to them. And this discussion with Putin, his coordination with Xi Jinping, these are important indications that he's not submitting to the pressure of Russiagate, at least not on these key issues. So take heart in that and get involved in the fight.
Absolutely. Very well said, Harley. Harley Schlanger, thank you so much again. You can visit, his work at LaRouchePAC.com, also on the Schiller Institute. Harley, thank you so much for being with us today.
Talk to you next week.
All right, take care, Harley. Thank you.